And so let's imagine this is the passage, Exodus 5:1-5, we just went. And this is the beginning, and what we've done is we've gone around it. That's what I did, is just a walk around and a walk through, right? Now what we're going to do is break it into bits. In order for it to be a structured breakdown, what we want to do is this time around, we kind of want to pull out that which is foundational in the text. What we want to do is look for its smaller parts. So I'm going to start with our prism, and it's just based on who, what, when, where, why. The thing that's the most important is who, which is essentially the image of God, identity, role, person. So let's look at our passage and say, what persons or people are there? So if we comb our passage, we have Moshe and Aaron, two men, Moses and Aaron. We can say, well, what are they? They're Levites, because they're literally from the tribe of Levi. They are two messengers, or angels. That's their role here. This fits with the foundational pattern of God or a king sending messengers in his stead. So the idea is they proxy for Yahweh, or they represent him, right? Who? We have Pharaoh. We know that Pharaoh is a title. He's supposedly a divinized human or God on the earth. There would be echoes in this idea of Genesis 6, a fusion of heaven and earth that's perverse. Something like the Nephilim, one of the men of great. Not necessarily Nephilim like tall, whatever, or large, or prowess, but this idea is there. He is associated with the serpent. He is the seen representative of the unseen serpent. Just as Moshe and Aaron are the seen representatives of the unseen, currently Yahweh. We have here another who? Yahweh, the God of Israel. And he's identified with Israel. And in this sense, what's helpful is the owner of Israel. Let's try to look at who in more generic terms. If we go to verse 4, it says, Vayomer alehem melech Mitzrayim. Pharaoh's called a king. So we have this title king, and that's really what's at odds here. We have the idea of a king, and then you have subjects. But what kind of subjects? We have slaves. So we actually have master and slaves. Owner and property, hierarchs, authorities. This passage deals with that. So we answer this who question. Yahweh, Pharaoh, two angels who are messengers. You have competing claims of identity. God, Yahweh, is telling Pharaoh through Moses and Aaron, he's competing. This identity will precede the work that's going to come next. Who, what is work or melachah. We have this idea that Yahweh is actually calling Israel a nation of priests. By extension, because we have access to the Torah, we know that sons and daughters, that's what they are. Pharaoh says they're property and they're slaves. Yahweh says they're priests. They have this work to do that they're going to call them to do a feast, to hold a festival. So we touched who. Let's move over to what. What is work? Malachah. Task, the arranging that flows out of your role. This passage is beautiful because it shows us how identity precedes action. Role precedes tasks. And you see indeed that who decides identity and role? A king, God, a head, in a sense a father. All of which Pharaoh claims to be and Yahweh claims to be. The work that Pharaoh tasks Israelites with is the work of slaves. He actually calls it saval, this idea of sivlotam, they're crushing. For that's the work for them. Their identity as low slave, that's their work. Don't take them from it. Not only this, he folds into, in a very bold move, the two so-called representatives in his eyes. Who is Yahweh? I don't know him. He mistreats them harshly and says, return back to your harsh labor, because you're mine too. The king decides your role and your identity and therefore determines your work. But Yahweh, he's got Moshe and Aaron, he says sons. Okay, and daughters, priests. That's the work he's going to call them to do. When he tells them to go into the wilderness, he doesn't just say to relax or to bring, beach chairs. It's a 3 days journey into the wilderness. They are to go and offer, verse 3, they're to sacrifice, which is it's work. The work of a son is different from the work of a slave. The word malachah is a dignified type of work, which comes from the verb malach, which means angel or representative. It means you proxy for the king and you're deputized to represent him. You share his image and you do what he does. This kind of work, you take that which is the raw materials, okay, that's been gathered and put at your feet, laid at your feet, and you rearrange it, removing the profane, the earthly parts, and translate it into heaven. That's all sacrifice is. You get these animals and you remove the parts that aren't translated into heaven, and you arrange the altar and you and slaughtering it, you bring the blood that has the life in it, you rearrange it, and you translate it into heaven. That's the work they're being called to do. You have two competing masters then. Two competing roles and identities that are put on the people of Israel. And you can imagine Israel as being like, Pharaoh speaks. Moshe and Aaron speak. Pharaoh speaks. Right? Like, who decides what I do? Pharaoh rightly understands what they're calling them to do Shabbat. You're going to take them away from their real work to do that Shabbat shit, or to make them cease from their real work. No, actually, it's time for them to cease to do what's heavier and more important. We also get to see, by the way, the malacha, literally the work of the two angels, the malachim, the two angels, the two messengers, Moshe and Aaron. Their work is to be a prophet and a mouthpiece for God, a vicar, a representation of Yahweh, an image. Moshe is like an instantiation of Yah, and Aaron's like his prophet or his mouthpiece. But we see the two sent ones, like apostle and prophet, together. So we've done who, what, and what leads to who, what, when, okay, which is moedim. And as I thought about it, the word moedim could be translated appointment, meeting times, the appropriate times where there's shift to meet an appointment. We get actual times. There's a weird peculiarity. They need time to perform the duty. So maybe the duty is 1 day long, and it's a 3-day journey, 3 days there, 3 days back, which could leave you with this nice day of celebration, which is like Shabbat. First action that Yahweh, he remembered us and he's coming for us. We are, remember who, what? We are his sons. He's called us to be his priests and to arrange things. Now he's got the time when to meet. He's going to give us Shabbat. It's like the first thing that they do. They have that 3-day journey, and they're going to do something like Shabbat, and they're going to bring offerings. The win on Pharaoh's side, conversely, isn't a competing timeline. He is simply refusing to recognize any times. There is no rest, no period of cessation. You are slaves. That's what you are. So that's the competing win. And then we move on, so from when to who, what, when, where. The where is important. We're going to shift to where. Not in Egypt. Instead, send them to the wilderness, Bamidbar. Now, we know from the other parts of the Torah, Bamidbar is just a shorthand way to refer in the wilderness, but we know the target. It's Mount Sinai. Where heaven and earth meet, Yahweh already revealed himself to Moshe. He's not bringing the people back to meet with him there. It's temple. And it's referred to as temple in one of the songs in Exodus. A temple term is used to describe it. So the where matters. It's temple. The where in the sense of Egypt, they're in Goshen. The where is the slave quarters. This is where they live in Egypt. They're bound here, and they're our property. They're not going anywhere. That's the competing where. So we've got this idea of who, what, when, where, and then the highest is why. And out of these four emerges a why. The why is love. That's always what the why is. You could also say the why is Torah. If we use Shabbat as the why, Shabbat is love. It's an arrangement for our building up and good and joining. God desires to be joined to this people. He desires for them to be his sons and daughters and to come to him. And he wants to call them out of where they are. Why is the most important question. The second most is who. Yahweh is insistent on this people. He set his targets on them, his sights on them. They belong to him. They're his. And he is moving to bring them out of where they are to join them to him. He is going to exert his kingship over the kingship of Pharaoh, and he's going to bring them to himself because they are the seed of Abraham. They are his children. The seed of Abraham in the form of Isaac is in a weird way Yahweh's son. They belong to Yahweh. He's going to redeem his seed back. That's the why. Yeah, that's a good stopping point for those.